We are so excited today because we have a special guest, Dr. Grace Glassman. Dr. Glassman is an emergency physician in New York, where she has served as an associate medical director, chief of patient experience, and program director for a health scholars internship. She came highly recommended by Dr. Sheeta Shaffi, who you might recognize from episode number 39 on stress. Sheeta thought the world would very much benefit from hearing Grace's amazing story, and once I read the article, I totally agree. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Glassman.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Grace, for joining us. And we are excited to get into this podcast and have a discussion about your harrowing event that actually was very amazing and life transforming. So could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your training, your family, where you're from, how you got here?
So, yes, I'm an emergency medicine physician at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York. And I was born and raised in Manhattan. I did a lot of other things before becoming a doctor. I lived in Tokyo and Japan. It took me a little extra time to figure out that I wanted to be a doctor. So I was a post-bac student. I was one of the oldest students in my med school class. I knew I wanted to be a doctor after having a skiing accident in Hokkaido, Japan. And
cool.
I had arthroscopic surgery there, and the doctors just got me back up and walking, and it was truly amazing. And then that was my epiphany. And then, even though I was pretty late to be coming to medicine, I decided I wanted to be a doctor. It took 10 years, and I knew those 10 years would go by no matter what. So I decided to spend those 10 years pursuing what I knew I really wanted to do in life. So, yeah, that's pretty much how I got into medicine. I pretty much, after having traveled the world so much, I wanted to be back home near my parents, who were kind of entering those twilight years, and it was a good decision. I did med school, residency, and all of my attending years in the New York area since then.
Awesome. That is great. Not all of us, I'm sure we have, excuse me, quite a few listeners that are non-traditional students. So that's amazing. I almost am like jealous of stories like that where people get to do all the things and find all
Life
the way before you.
experience.
I know, have a real
Yeah.
life experience.
Yeah.
Committing to a decade of all of the med school and residency.
Yeah, I wasn't very directed. It wasn't very methodical. I
love
followed my dream.
That's
I
awesome.
like it.
We love to hear that.
Better.
So one of the reasons we have you on today is because you wrote an amazing article that was published in Slate, and it was really recounting a brave story of actually nearly losing your life. Would you share that experience with our listeners today?
I'd love to. So it's such a long story. I'll try and make it just right. Not too long, not too short. So I have 3 kids. And so this courageous story happened more than 9 years ago already. So it's kind of very settled in my memory, but it was quite a roller coaster ride. Part of it was because I was an older mother giving birth. All 3 of my pregnancies were C-sections. So this unexpected roller coaster ride happened with my last pregnancy. And basically, because it was my 3rd C-section, it was definitely a scheduled C-section. I think if I had gone into labor earlier, they might have let me try. But the safest thing to do is, certainly in the opinion of the OBGYN community, is not to labor long and to have a scheduled C-section. So for all those moms who've had scheduled C-sections, there's something very interesting about waking up and knowing in just a few hours you will have another baby in the world. And there's something super exciting about that and very surreal about that feeling. I had gotten up super early before my alarm went off, and my husband drove me in, and I was very careful about the pregnancy. I knew, so I was just shy of 46 at the time, 4 months shy of 46 when I had my last baby. And so I did all the things that you need to do when you are advanced maternal age. You are considered a tad more high risk than the rest of the population. Although in New York City, where I'm from, it's it's pretty common. Women work on their careers for a very long time and very intensely, and especially in medicine. And often there really is just no time to take a break and think about having children. So in my case, because I started medicine so late, residency so late, I did not, and I got married late too. I did not have the time to have children earlier. Residency was so intense. I wasn't one of those incredibly well organized female residents who could have babies and continue and juggle all that. I tip my hat to all those women. Bravo. I got pregnant in the very end of my residency. So that's when I started having my babies. So we had done all of the prenatal testing and the amniocentesis and the ultrasounds and I knew it was a touch risky. So instead of, there was a hospital literally 2.5 blocks from my house. I thought that the best way to make sure I had everything around me, just in case something should go bad, I decided to go to a hospital much farther away, we call it quaternary care center with a dedicated children's hospital, an incredible NICU. I had no sort of indication that anything would go bad, but I just liked having the NICU, 1 minute away from me should anything go bad. So I did that all for the baby. I had no thought of my needing their extra special services. So, I'd ride the subway all through pregnancy. It was an hour subway ride from my house. And not all New Yorkers are good about giving up your seat for a pregnant woman. So often I would just stand the whole way. And my friends really thought I was crazy, especially the ones not in medicine. They just would all ask me, "Oh my gosh, why do you take the subway that far away?" But I just had an instinct that it would be the best thing to do just in case. So that morning, we woke up really early. We went. My husband drove me in. They prepped me. And, it was my third go around having a C-section. So I felt pretty experienced and knowledgeable about how it all goes down. I relinquished my role as a doctor at that point. I was just happy to embrace the role of patient. And, it's super interesting getting operated on. And, you're awake. It's just an epidural. And, my husband they brought him in and they seated him next to me, and they have the curtain that separates you from the surgical field. And, it was my third time around. So I knew exactly what was going on. Sounds, the smells in the OR, like the cautery knife and your flesh being incised with the cautery knife and the smells that emerge from that and the amniotic fluid splashing to the floor and the totally human conversation that happens among the operating team, the jokes, the pleasantries, like all that. I totally understood because I've been on the other side of the curtain. I was a med student in residency and I retracted on C-sections and I watched the whole thing. And so it's just an incredibly interesting experience being the one who's supine and being operated on. So I don't know if you want me to go through the ins and outs of the surgery. They're very, very fascinating. It's all in my article. It's so funny. I wrote the article and to be perfectly honest, the first time I had a C-section, I was told, I was going to be a 9 a.m. C-section. And so it was NPO from the night before, and my case kept on getting bumped and bumped and bumped. And I don't think I went till like 2 p.m. or something. And I had been NPO from the night before. And I imagine some of you have had children and you know how it feels to be pregnant and hungry. And it is such a primitive drive. Like you need something, you need some sugar, you need something for the baby who just like a full formed entity at that point.
Yeah.
So honestly, I had just a little sip of coffee and like 1 or 2 bites of cereal that morning, like 4 a.m. because I just had this feeling like I might get bumped again. And it's just such an unbearable feeling. And lo and behold, I was so in time. I went straight to the OR. And, they gave me the anesthesia, and for whatever reason, it all came up.
Oh
The
no.
ice chips and the cereal and the coffee, and it was fine. I just turned to the left and it all came out and it was no problem, and nobody paused at all, which was good. Nobody really worried about me, and I knew what to do, which was turn left and don't aspirate and don't get the sterile feel unsterile.
Yeah.
And the doctors and the anesthesia, they all stayed focused on the C-section, which was the right thing to do. But interestingly, I read some of the comments in my Slate article, and some people really trolled me for that. But people say anything. But anyway, it's true. You do vomit if you have a full stomach. So anyway, the C-section went well. And before you knew it, I had a new baby girl, and she was just astounding. Like, she was so beautiful. You never really know if, despite all the ultrasounds and the prenatal testing, if it's all going to be fine. And she was just perfect, and so much more beautiful than I expected. It's funny to say, but basically, like, part of my whole kind of staying calm about the whole thing is I just wanted healthy and normal. I felt like beautiful was icing on the cake, and I was not going to ask for that before I had her, but she was really a knockout. And my husband was so glad that it was a girl, and that was a funny moment. He kind of jumped in the OR and pumped his fist into the air and said, "Oh my God, a girl!" And that made me laugh because I didn't know he was rooting for a girl.
Yeah.
Nurses and doctors, where they laughed too because they hadn't seen such an effusive show of joy in the OR in a while. So we were in the postpartum area, and we were loving the silent time, the phone's off, and we do what people do when they have a newborn. They enjoy it. It's a very special moment. But what was starting to happen was I kept on bleeding. And, in the course of things, post-op bleeding is normal. And I had a very good nurse, and she just changed the sheets underneath me. I still had the epidural going. I couldn't feel a thing. I couldn't see a thing. Your belly is still pretty big postpartum, so I couldn't see over the hump. And I didn't see, my legs were not listening to me. They were totally paralyzed. And I had no idea what was going on down there, but she kept on changing me. And it went on, and then she got a little bit worried, and she said to me, "Dr. Glassman, you're still bleeding, and it's going on a little too much. So I'm going to call the doctors back." And I said, "Okay, fine. It's fine." And she called the senior resident who came and checked me. And then she called the anesthesiologist who came and checked me. And she also called her attending. And, it was slow, very, very slow in the beginning. And nobody was really that alarmed. But it just kept on going. And the dirty laundry bin began to be more and more full of blood-soaked sheets. And it slowly started escalating. And at one point, someone said, "Oh, your blood pressure is a little low." And I said, "Oh, really, that's fine. I'm always kind of 90/60 at baseline. On a bad day, I'm like 110/70. So you really don't need to worry." I was actually reassuring them. So maybe I actually threw them off the scent a bit. I'm not sure. But they took it seriously. Someone said, "Put the blood pressure on the other arm. Maybe that'll help," which I thought that was really funny because as an emergency medicine doctor, I always do that.
Just keep pushing the button until it gets normal.
Yes, go get a different size cuff until you get a number that you like. So they did all that, which I totally understood. And so the anesthesiologist came back at one point, and she said to me, "So your pressures are a little low. Not really sure what to make of it. I do think it's probably from the epidural, the sedatives, the analgesics," which is true. That's a thing. Your blood pressure can get low just from the medicines and the epidural. And then she said, but just in case, could you sign this consent for a transfusion? And at that point, it was like the brakes in my head, it just came to a grinding halt. Like, what? A transfusion? And I never had a transfusion. I'm really healthy otherwise. Like, I don't have any medical problems. And I never in my life thought I would need a transfusion. And certainly I've ordered enough transfusions as an emergency medicine doctor, and ordering and convincing patients to get one and explaining them the benefits and all that. It's just so rote in my head. It's really nothing. But then when I'm on the receiving end, I really paused. I thought, whoa, transfusion. But at the same time, I knew that I needed it, or I would maybe possibly need it soon. So obviously I signed it, and on it went in that fashion. And sure enough, someone did pull the trigger on that and decided I did need my first unit, and ordered it, and it started running. And that was really quite a fascinating moment. It was like in slow motion, just watching the blood go into my arm painlessly. It was an interesting moment. So for whatever reason, I kept, the sheets kept on needing to be changed. I kept on having a postpartum hemorrhage, and more people started coming into the room to assess me and think about me. And little by little, all of those things behind me that we use in medicine, monitors and, the blood hanging and pumps and all that, those little things that we add on piecemeal when we have unstable patients in ED, that whole installation started accumulating behind my bed. And meanwhile, I'm aware of what's going on, but I'm also I have a newborn in the world, and I wanted to be a mom. And, I asked, they take the baby away in the nursery. I asked if I could have her so I could start breastfeeding, that there's we all know how good breastfeeding is. And so there's a lot of pressure to begin breastfeeding immediately after the baby's born. And, it's my third baby, so I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I asked if I could nurse while they were working on me, and they obliged. Someone brought my baby to me. And meanwhile, they're trying to get more lines on me, more access. So it was quite a scrim, quite a collection of people, one team of nurses working on one arm, me holding the baby in the other, trying to nurse. By this time, I think we were on the second or third unit. They had also started pressors on me, I think it was gentle peripheral pressors, just to keep my blood pressure up. So, I could feel well, I guess, and just to keep me in safe territory. And, my OB had gone home after my surgery was over because it all looked fine. And I was her last case, and she had done a long call, and she too was 9 months pregnant, by the way. And I was her last case, and she literally began her maternity leave after she operated on me. So she went home and thinking correctly that all seemed well. And so I was handed to a new doctor. I think they do sign out and do shifts like emergency medicine doctors. And I had never met her before, this new doctor. And she was brought on as sort of the new captain of the team, my attending. And she struck me as really young, capable, but young. And ironically, she also went to my med school, and I felt definitely an affinity because I knew she got through my med school, and we had that in common too. So I knew I was in good hands, and she seemed really confident and not overly so, but authoritative, and she knew what was going on. And at this point, there were a lot of people in the room, and a lot of people worried about me. And I get through stressful moments I don't panic, and I believe in humor. I think that I don't believe in it. I do it. And so I know that they were all getting very, very stressed, because this is a doctor on the table who's kind of in a precarious situation. And I really did them didn't want them to have another layer of stress just because of me. I didn't want to make things any harder for them. So I was talking to all of them like I would colleagues. We were talking shop, we were talking cases, we were talking this and that, technicalities, putting lines in, and all that stuff. And then when she was there, and she was clearly so focused on me and taking me very, very seriously, and there was a pause in the room, and I said, Dr. So-and-so, I call her Dr. P because she still wants to, she doesn't want to be famous about this case. And I said, Dr. P, don't you hate it when you walk into a shift and you get handed a train wreck? Because I know I do. I said that to her, and it had the right effect. She laughed a little bit, and the whole room laughed, and it was good. It was a good moment to dispel, to bring down the stress level a touch. So the next thing they tried was they put in this thing called a Bacri balloon. I had not come across this before. It's really the territory of OBGYNs. It's an inflatable balloon or bladder, basically. It's in the deflated position. They push it through the cervix, and once it's in the cervix, they inflate it. And the idea is to tamponade whatever's bleeding and leave it there for a bit and hope the body just naturally does its thing and clots off and stops the bleeding. At this point, I think, I didn't know it. I found this out at long after. The theory was that my placenta had implanted low. And even though my uterus had contracted and they gave me, all the meds they do to help stop the bleeding, it wasn't enough. The thought was the bleeding was coming from a little bit too far down on my uterus, and the contracting muscles were not tamponading the blood vessels enough. So they put that in, and they waited for, I'm not sure how long. Time is sort of a bit of a blur, and then they waited the appropriate amount of time and then deflated it and pulled it out just to see. And then it was just an incredible gush of blood afterwards. And even with my epidural on, I could feel that. I felt nothing, but I could feel the pressure of the volume. They were, big clots. I call them the size of mangoes. That's about how big they were. And so at that point, it truly was, a 7-alarm fire, I guess. I had noticed that the nurses were struggling so hard to get extra access into my arms. And a little further down the road, I noticed that every site that they attempted became a big bruise, hematoma. And I said, I wasn't really sure, but I said half in jest and half kind of testing the waters, gee, I really hope I'm not going into DIC. And I said that to my attending and the attending who took over, and everybody else. It was out loud. And I really wanted someone to say that's not true. But no one said anything, and they just got more serious. And, unfortunately, it turned out I was going into DIC. And I think by now they were on like the 4th unit of blood, and they had really tried everything. And my doctor said, okay, that's it. There is no way to stop this bleeding. We have to go back to the operating room and we have to do a hysterectomy. So, they hastily called ahead. They unhooked me to all the pumps and everything that was connected to me. And they put the cardiac monitor on the bed, and they started racing me to the operating room, and they just stopped for a second to let me say goodbye to my husband and my newborn, who was still in the room. And I was still totally with it. I knew exactly what was going on. I felt totally fine until the very end. And I looked at my husband. Oh, I forgot to mention my children, my older 2 children, who were 5 and 3 at the time, they had shown up because our nanny had brought them to the hospital because it happened kind of quickly, and nobody thought to stop the plan that the kids would come and we would be enjoying ourselves in our room and enjoying the new baby. So they were there, and not in the room, obviously, but they were somewhere nearby, and my husband had been going back and forth to them and me. And obviously he did not tell my 5-year-old and my 3-year-old that mommy's not doing so well, he he emphasized the happy part of it, that the baby was just fantastic and doing well, and he took them to the nursery so they could look through the glass window and all that. And so he put on a good show for the kids. Their names are Ben and Lila. So as they were racing me to the operating room, they stopped for a moment, and my husband had my newborn tucked away in his elbow, holding her nice and tight. And I got to touch her little toe, her big toe, and I got to rub it. And I said to my husband, I'm sorry. I apologize, actually. And it's a weird thing to do, but I said I was sorry because I really knew that I had pushed for this third child, that I really wanted a third. I love motherhood. I love, that very young child's, the baby and toddler part of development. I just love that so much, and I really wanted a third. So I of the two of us, I wanted that one more, and I think I said sorry for that because I felt like I had put myself in that spot. I had mid my invincibility in having a third, and I also said how all of them, I love them. And the sorry also was, it wasn't said, but it was implied. If I don't make it, I'm sorry. I'm leaving you alone with 3 little children. And he just looked at me and squeezed my hand and said, just fight. You can do it. And so they raced me into the operating room, and my attending, my doctor was alongside me, and I found her hand. Her hand was on the gurney, on the railing, and I just held her hand, and I looked at her and I said, Dr. P, really, you really need to save me for my kids. And I looked at her and she was crying. I was shocked. There was a tear running down her cheek, and I didn't know what to make of that. She was in control, but she made me think she is very aware of what's going on and what's at stake here. So at that point, during that time, that's the only time I started to feel really bad. Like I felt like I was no longer, I was never in control, but I started to feel like, whoa, this is really out of my hands. And I felt woozy and dizzy, and I started dry heaving. And I'm sure I looked incredibly pale and gray, and I felt like it was really touch and go at that point. My husband later told me at some point he looked at the monitor and I was 67 or 19 was my blood pressure. And I think this was even with the pressors going. So yeah, that was a very touch and go time. So they put me on the operating table again, and someone threw a oxygen mask over my face. And I don't really know why I felt the need again to make sure that everybody in the room knew that I had children I needed to get back to. And I also felt like I needed to say one thing to them one last time because I was anonymous to them. And I took the oxygen. I had no strength, but I managed to take the oxygen mask off. And I said to everyone in the team, hey, team, I really need you to bring your A game now to me, not for me, but for my children, so I can go back to them. They need their mom. And that was it. And then they put me under, and apparently this, obviously I wasn't awake for this part, so I don't know, but they did a very stat hysterectomy. That part was not difficult at all, but I was truly in DIC, and I was bleeding in all the wrong places, oozing everywhere. And by this time they were giving me every blood product, platelets, plasma, everything, cryo, more and more units of blood. And so they told me that they did the hysterectomy, and then they packed me and they just waited. And they sent runner after runner after runner to get more blood products from the blood bank, and they just wanted all that stuff to go in and were waiting for my body to turn a corner and for DIC to stop. So at some point, they felt that things were looking a little better, and they felt that maybe I had turned a corner, and they took the packing out and closed and sent me to the SICU. I got 19 units of blood and a lot of other stuff. And in the middle of the night, I guess in the surgical ICU, I had woken up. I had the ET tube in my throat, and my husband was there. I guess his brother was there too. He'd call his brother to be with us too. And I don't remember this part, but someone gave me a pencil and paper, and because I had the ET tube, I couldn't talk. But I wrote on a piece of paper, and it really, I kept that paper. It really, I don't know if you remember from med school and your neurology rotations when you assess stroke patients and you ask them to draw like a clock and put the numbers on, and all you get is like a line trailing down diagonally. It often, my notes often look like that, but somehow in all that, I managed to write in clear letters, "Need a drink," to my husband. And "You're a mensch." But I also wrote, "What's my BP?" question mark.
Yeah.
And "How many units?" question mark. And DIC with 3 question marks afterwards. And then, of course, there's love is written many times over. And my kids' 3 names. We had named my daughter by then. Like, we had already decided on the name Hannah. And so their names are on this piece of paper. So I think that was so interesting that in the fog of all that, that knowledge that is so burned in your brain and that you feel it's almost primordial, like it just came out, like the things that were important to me and my burning desire to know the pathophysiology behind what was happening to me. That was so nerdy, but I wanted to know. Like, it just seemed so incomprehensible to me. Was I really in DIC? Like, how is that? How could that have happened? I needed affirmation. So yeah.
Another thing that like I noticed is like you never lose your cool, even despite actively going towards the light. I feel like that resonates with so many of us. And you were always thinking of others. The entire time you're trying to joke with the staff so that they're not stressed about you. You know what I mean? It's just a completely different mentality, and you're pleading on behalf of your kids. I think that there's something about us that is just different, and I love it. And you say in the article that you were euphoric for like 6 months after. And by the way, we will have the link to the article in the show notes. Just scroll down there. Everyone should read it and share it with everyone you know. But you were euphoric for 6 months after this event. But then life went back to normal, and you even welcomed the banal. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So after it all happened and I recovered so fast, I went home. They discharged me 1 day later than a normal inpatient C-section stay. At least 9 years ago. I don't know what they're doing now for inpatient. It's probably outpatient at this point.
Look at you winning. Even when you almost died, you're winning. Good job, sister.
Yeah. So I was so lucky. Like, I felt like I truly was on the precipice. I was even hanging over the precipice, and I got reeled back. And so I had this incredible perspective on life and the meaning of life and the value of life and family and love and relationships. And, like, it's so kind of common and trite to say, don't sweat the small stuff, life is too short. But in the wake of that, I truly felt that and lived that and breathed that. Like, I was walking on clouds for that postpartum period, the first 6 months of my baby's life, and nothing could bring me down. Nothing. I didn't care about the trivial stuff. And it's really, I think it's probably what, like, a Zen Buddhist monk achieves
Yeah.
when they do all that intense meditation and they reach that stage of truly nirvana or whatever it is. And I had it for so long, and I knew that it wouldn't last forever. And then I don't have the exact time, but around 6 months later, life kind of resumed its rhythm. And I think I went back to work 4 months after the fact, 3 months, I don't remember. But I was back into the routine and my body had completely recovered. And, my kids were too loud, and diapers needed to be changed and bottles needed to be washed, and I needed to go to work, and life went back to its normal rhythms. And that was good too. That was a blessing too. I think ultimately it made me think that the rhythms of your day, the rhythm of your days, and the work that you do, certainly as a doctor, that's all so incredibly meaningful. And it was a gift to be able to go back fully intact. And, to not have such fireworks in your life is a good thing. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
I embrace going back to the banal of my days, not to make light of it, but it was just a wonderful thing to go back to your normal everyday routine. And then to have this insight about what happened to me. Yeah, it was really, and so I felt like I was saved, and I didn't really suffer. I worried a bit. There were aspects that were a little painful and uncomfortable, but they didn't drag on forever. So I was given this gift of insight without having to pay too much of a price for it. And that's why I felt I was so lucky.
Well, I hope Dr. P spent some time appreciating what she had contributed to. And I think of so many times when we literally bring somebody back to life and just kind of brush it off. Well, like, that's part of my job. I think we diminish the impact that we have working in medicine so often and just dwell on the negative. Yet hearing your story reminds us of just how meaningful our jobs are. How do you think any differently about working in medicine after your experience?
Yeah, oh my gosh. I had so much gratitude for everybody who was a part of saving me. And then there were so many of them were anonymous. I'll never know who they were, down to the person who matched my blood type in the blood bank, and the tech who went running for the units of blood, and the person who keeps that operating room running, so that it all was a well-oiled machine when I really needed them. And of course, the doctors and the nurses, and they just performed so incredibly well on that day, and they saved me. I feel like the press loves to, like, rag on doctors and the whole
Yeah.
healthcare system, and they love to say we do the things we do to bill higher. And I don't know. I just felt that it was such a clear crystallization of, like, what doctors and nurses do at their best and what we're meant to do and why we went through all that training. And it so often it has such amazing results, like mine, especially, like people like me that are still, youngish and have families and are productive and want to go back to all that in one piece. And they did it, and they were such heroes because they did it so well. I hope that came across in my article. I wrote the article in many ways. I had many versions of it. I had a much longer part about, basically praising the whole healthcare system, but different editors along the way said, that's too predictable, Grace. You gotta take that part out.
I love, though, that you give credit to the person that was cross-matching your blood. I love it that you give credit to the tech that ran and got it. I love giving credit to the people that are doing the laundry. It is all, and just mark it down. I think this is the first time I've ever cried on one of our podcasts, but what we do is so important.
It is
And
so
all of it
true.
matters.
So true. And it happens every day, all the time, thousands of cases all over the country, tens of thousands, who knows? Big and small encounters. Mine was big, but in small ways too. It does matter, and it is tremendous. And it's really wonderful. And yeah, my doctor, in all her humility and grace, did not want to be named, even though she is such a badass. And she saved me, and I've been in touch with her, and I still go to her, and I worship her. But she doesn't want fame in that way. She just wants to keep on doing what she does. She told me she read the article, and she's like, "Wow, this." She didn't know. She didn't see who wrote the article. She's like, "Wow, this sounds so familiar." When she knew, and then she knew it was me. When she got to the part about the note, writing the DIC question, she's like, "Oh my gosh, that is her." So funny. So yeah, and nowadays in the emergency department, when I have those cases too, that they're on all like that, obviously. But when I do have those important, when you've done everything right, and sometimes, often, most of the time in the emergency department, we don't really know what the patient's outcome is going to be because they get admitted or they go to the OR, but you've given the patient a chance. Yeah, it feels really amazing. Yeah. I think that whole episode, prolonged any kind of burnout that I might feel about what I do. So it's, yeah, it's good. Everybody who's listening should feel incredibly good about what they do. I know. I mean, I used to I was in a different career, and I know that it is definitely not as fulfilling and satisfying as what we do in our life.
Well, one thing that I'm noticing is that you are just like, you just exude joy. Did you do that before all this happened?
I don't know. I'm a pretty serious person. I think I'm lucky because I think even when I'm not sure and I'm in a bit over my head, I tend to smile. So I think that has unintentional positive returns around me. And when I'm in over my head, I'm also very calm. So people think I'm in control when I'm really like going through every algorithm in my head and thinking, what, like in my head, the wheels are in overdrive. The wheels are just turning. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. But the facade I project, and it's not intentional, is one of calm and occasionally a smile. Sometimes I'm so nervous and smile that I get called out on it. The patient will say, "What are you smiling at?" And I have to like stop smiling, but it's a nervous smile. But yeah, I mean, I think as I said in the beginning, like laughter, humor is a very good thing, in my opinion. It is something I return to again and again. It helps break the ice. It helps break the tension. I'm not, a stand-up comic by any stretch, but I do appreciate the humor of a situation, even one as bad as what I was in. Interestingly, in some of the comments, like someone said, I think it was a doctor, he said, "I've seen that. I understand why people try to keep it light or lighter in those really, really devastating moments, not just in the hospital, but like maybe in a car accident, or maybe firefighters see it too, and first responders. I think it's a human instinct, like, because if you really started talking about how bad things were, I mean, that's not productive.
No.
So,
Yeah, it's interesting. The sense of humor we EM docs develop over time definitely is a coping mechanism. So I have one more question and then we'll close out. Actually, I have two more. Do you have any advice for the rest of us to be able to feel more alive? Like you feel alive now without having to go to the brink of death ourselves?
I I really think that life, the joy of life, is in these small moments, the quote unquote banal, your everyday life. Like, I think if we keep on striving for the stuff we don't have and feeling like we're coming up short, we're definitely gonna feel disappointment and stress and it like a failure or whatever. But we are in those lives that we are living those lives we tried so hard to be in when we were in med school and residency. We are in that moment that, oh, if I could just get there, things are going to be fantastic. Like, we're there. And if we could just think about our daily lives that way, I think that's the recipe for happiness. I don't think happiness is backflips and, winning awards and, I don't know, the number of followers you have on some social media thing or promotions. I think it is just being content with the beauty in your life as it is right now. If it may be children, it may be your dog, it may be your parents, it may be your friendships, it may be taking care of your older parents, going to kids recital in school. I think that's where the happiness is, and we should just acknowledge that and not keep on feeling like we're coming up short,
Yeah. I love
so that would be that's how I think of it. And I think now that I'm even older than when I wrote the article, I'm even more comfortable with that way of thinking. I don't need to get to the top of the pyramid. I don't need to have the nicest car, or whenever my kids don't have to make it into Ivy League schools, they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
I think we should just breathe a little and take some of the pressure off of ourselves. It's all going to be okay.
I love that. That's the best advice, people, you'll hear all day, probably all year. So soak that in. So Grace, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how might they be able to do that?
So now, after this article, I never used to be on social media, by the way. I had to learn it all in the wake of this article. I literally was up trying to understand Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all that stuff. So I think if you Google me, so my ex Twitter handle is Grace Bogey, which was the name of my former dog, MD, and whatever the Twitter thing is. And if you go to LinkedIn, if you just type my name in, I come up. I think if you type my name in, the article comes up, and then you can follow the thread from there. And I check every now and then, and people really want to get to know me, or I'll respond for sure. It really did strike a chord among older women who were a little bit late to have children, and it became like I don't know, people kind of rallied around the article because it seemed to have spoken to them, the pressures of career women, and not just career women, any woman who has, for whatever life circumstances, has had to wait to have children. It's for whatever reason, it kind of came a thing to rally around. It's not something that people talk about much, that incredibly kind of finite window that you have to have your children and, do it in a healthy, responsible way. I mean, it's just, our windows are short and we have so many pressures upon us. And I guess it really kind of shined a light on that for women. Right. So yeah, reach out, read my article, send me comments. Love to hear them.
Thank you so much, Grace. You are amazing, and your story really does. It does help provide some meaning, like a lot of meaning to what we do, and we don't always see the other side of it. So it is very gratifying to see you so radiant and beautiful and healthy and happy and just enjoying life.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to you three for doing what you do and, putting together so many good stories to make us all feel better about what we do and proud, happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, so much. And thank you for listening today. And if you have been listening, we are going to be speaking at the Revitalize Women's Retreat on April 5th through the 7th in Huntington Beach, California. We'll have the link in the show notes so you can get signed up. And we recently launched a new version of our online course. So if you want to check that out, go to www.thewholephysician.com/W Wellness 911 to get more information. So until next time, you are whole, you are a gift to medicine, and the work you do matters.